Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this final discussion in this series, I want to end with talking about the whole process of falling in love with God. Now, as we go on into this talk, I would like to start with the Sufi Parable, and I know I must have narrated this quite a few times in the past, but it's worth reminding ourselves. So they state that there were several groups of people who were given slates to recreate an original painting upon. Now, back in the day, obviously, they talked of slates, not paper and boards. So the painting was placed in front of them and they were given a set time. When the set time finished, the examiners approached and examined each and every drawing. And they accorded marks in accordance with the accuracy of the depiction within that slate. They went to the fifth group and they said, "What have you produced?" So they said, "Come and look at what we have done." When the examiner went there, they didn't see a painting. They just saw a very polished, straightened out, reflective slate. They said, "But you haven't produced anything. How can we mark you?" So they said, "Bring the original work and place it in front of it." When the original work was placed in front of that reflective slate, the whole of the work was reflected in its fullest glory. They said, "Why should we duplicate something when we can embrace the original?" The moral here was that if we cleanse ourselves of ourselves, then the most beloved will reflect himself through us. Every attempt to become God-like through ourselves will always be blemished, like the other paintings. They were crooked slightly. The slate wasn't reflective enough. They were bent slightly. The color scheme was off. What this says to us is that we cannot meet God. We cannot complete ourselves. We cannot find ourselves. The only way to do that is to let go of ourselves. Once we remove ourselves from ourselves, that is when the true beauty that is within ourselves begins to emerge in its most glorious manner. What I'm trying to say here is that the way we are understanding God and going about finding Him is a prelude to the real thing. You see, undeniably, God is the nurturer, and in that sense, He is the parent. God is the creator. God is the king. God is the one who commands. These are all faces of God. God is stern. No doubt, He has to be feared. God's majesty is overwhelming. He fills our souls with awe and terror. We tremble in front of Him when we get a glimpse of His majesty. The other one, from whom there is nothing but alienation. But in the realist sense, if we were to adhere to these aspects of God, God will always remain the other. He will dispense with judgment for sure on the day of Qiyamah under the pact, under the terms of the pact that we have made with Him prior to coming here. But beyond it all is God Himself. It's like a parent who is also our instructor, who is also our boss, who is also a judge. We can know Him in all these capacities. But if we know Him in individual capacity, we don't know Him in every capacity. If we know Him in every capacity, we still don't know Him in His own self. The only way to acquire the fullness of understanding of God and what we are to become by finding Him is to go beyond all of these aspects of God and begin to let go of ourselves and the variety of aspects of God. And the only way that is possible is to fall in love with God. How do we fall in love with God? Well, we said in the previous discussion, when God is befriended and He becomes that proximate and He embraces us as we are, we become comfortable with God. As we become comfortable with God, we begin to feel Him and His blessed touch at the level of our souls. As we feel His touch at the level of our souls, we begin to let go of ourselves and we begin to find our true selves in Him. And that is the birth of love. And it doesn't end until the seeker diminishes, the sought after finishes, the whole struggle comes to an end, and the seeker fades away in the object of love. I gave this analogy a few years ago, that a wave in search of the ocean will find the ocean when it ceases to be itself. As soon as it tries to stop finding the ocean, it fades away within the ocean, and there it has found the ocean, that it was nothing but the ocean from the very start. So the final point is to fall in love with God. The dictate of love is that the lover values the beloved beyond itself. What that does is that the lover gives him or herself over to the want of the beloved. And in this sense, the devotional practices are extremely potent and important. The richness of symbolism that is entailed within the devotional practices. You see, the human pride is such that we would rather have our heads cut than to bow in humility and humiliate ourselves. But when we do that, we are actually offering a gesture that in front of you, my pride is prostrated. In front of you, my pride is bowed. And these are specifically set, these postures, in that manner to allow us to give ourselves over to God. I want to finish by this last sort of thought that I often see myself and the community frightened of death, frightened of the hereafter, frightened of the judgment of God. And I find this a very uncomfortable state. No matter how unruly I may be, I know that the lap of my mother will always be welcoming. In fact, she suffers more when I stay away from her. And she suffers when I think that she is not kind enough to forgive me. that is a disservice to a mother. Then what about God, who has created the heart of a mother? How can God be waiting at the point of death to seize me and to punish me? How can anybody believe in such a God? Would our mothers punish us after a long stay away from her? She would be crying, waiting to embrace us. She will not even entertain the thought of how many wrongs you've done. Yes, she will complain in love that I waited for you and you didn't even remember me. But that would be a complaint of love, not a vengeful complaint. That is our God. He waits us more eagerly than mothers wait for their children. And hence the Hadith says that if my creatures were to know the extent of my desire for them, they would die willingly at the blinking of an eye. So God is not to be feared in this way. God is to be loved. I will finish with this final thought, that if we can rethink into the nature of our God and understand that God is beyond vengeance and commanding us and a master and a friend. God is the blind lover of His creatures. He loves us more than we love ourselves. To have confidence in our God and to give ourselves away to His beauty so that we may ourselves display that beauty through us. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.